Sarah Thompson stood on the cracked pavement outside what used to be her home, staring at the charred remains of her life. The small house in rural Ohio, with its creaky porch and wildflower garden, was now a skeleton of blackened wood and ash. The fire had come without warning 2 weeks ago, in the dead of night, swallowing her home, her memories, and worst of all, her sense of safety. She was 34, a single mother to her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, and they'd lost everything: clothes, photos, the little stuffed bear Lily clung to every night. Sarah's heart ached as she remembered Lily's screams that night, the way she'd scooped her daughter up and run barefoot into the cold, watching helplessly as flames devoured their world. They were safe, thank God, but now they were homeless, with nothing but a suitcase of donated clothes and a temporary cot at a local shelter. Sarah felt like she was drowning, her chest tight with grief and fear. How do you rebuild when you have nothing left? She worked as a cashier at a small grocery store, barely making enough to cover rent before the fire. Now, with no savings, no family to lean on, and no clear path forward, she felt the weight of the world crushing her. Every night, Lily would ask, "Mama, when can we go home?" And Sarah would force a smile, whispering, "Soon, baby," while her heart broke a little more. The shelter was crowded, noisy, and smelled of bleach and despair. Sarah tried to stay strong for Lily, braiding her hair each morning and telling her stories about princesses who always found their way. But inside, Sarah was unraveling. She'd stopped looking in mirrors because she couldn't stand the hollow-eyed woman staring back. Her co-workers were kind, slipping her extra shifts when they could, but it wasn't enough. The landlord of the burned house had no insurance to cover tenant losses, and the Red Cross could only provide temporary aid. Sarah felt like she was failing Lily, failing herself. One gray morning, as rain pattered on the shelter's tin roof, Sarah sat at a wobbly table, staring at a stack of bills she couldn't pay. Medical expenses from smoke inhalation, a phone bill, a loan she'd taken to cover groceries. It was all piling up. Lily was coloring in a donated book nearby, humming softly, unaware of her mother's spiraling thoughts. Sarah's hands trembled as she clutched a lukewarm coffee, her mind racing. What if they couldn't get out of this? What if Lily grew up in shelters, moving from one cot to another? The thought made her stomach churn. She whispered a prayer, something she hadn't done since she was a child, begging for a sign, a spark of hope. That's when she noticed a man at the shelter's entrance, talking to the volunteer coordinator. He was older, maybe in his late 50s, with a weathered face and kind eyes. He wore a simple jacket and carried a clipboard, jotting notes as he glanced around the room. Sarah didn't think much of it. Volunteers came and went, but there was something about him, a quiet warmth that stood out against the shelter's bleakness. His name, she'd later learn, was Tom, a retired teacher who spent his days helping people in ways most never noticed. Tom wasn't rich or famous, he was just a man who believed small acts could change lives. That day, he was at the shelter to distribute coats and blankets, a project he'd funded himself by saving for months. Sarah didn't know it yet, but Tom's presence would mark the beginning of a turning point. As she watched, he knelt beside a young boy, handing him a bright red coat and ruffling his hair with a smile. The boy's face lit up, and for a moment, Sarah felt a pang of envy, not for the coat, but for the lightness in that moment. She wanted that for Lily, for herself. Tom's eyes met hers across the room, and he gave a small nod, as if he could see the weight she carried. Sarah looked away, embarrassed, but something about that glance stuck with her. Later that afternoon, Tom approached her table, holding 2 coats, one for an adult, one for a child. "These are for you and your daughter," he said softly, his voice steady but kind. Sarah hesitated, pride prickling at her. She wasn't used to accepting help. It felt like admitting defeat. But Lily's excited gasp as she saw the pink coat with the unicorn patch made Sarah's resistance crumble. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice catching. Tom smiled and said, "No need to thank me, just keep going." Those words, simple as they were, hit Sarah like a lifeline. She didn't know why, but they felt like permission to hope again. Over the next few days, Tom became a familiar face at the shelter. He wasn't pushy or loud, but he was there, fixing a broken chair, bringing books for the kids, or just listening to people's stories. Sarah noticed how he treated everyone with the same respect, whether they were a struggling parent like her or a grizzled veteran who'd seen too much. One evening, as Lily played with a puzzle Tom had brought, he sat down across from Sarah. "You're doing better than you think," he said, out of the blue. Sarah laughed bitterly. "Doesn't feel like it. I can't even give my daughter a home." Tom leaned forward, his eyes steady. "A home's not just walls. It's what you're giving her every day: love, strength. The rest will come." Sarah wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't understand, but something in his voice stopped her. He spoke like someone who'd been through his own storms. She learned later that Tom had lost his wife to cancer years ago and had raised his son alone, scraping by until he found his footing. His words weren't empty, they carried the weight of experience. That night, Sarah lay awake on her cot, Lily curled beside her, and thought about what Tom said. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of something, maybe not hope, but possibility. Tom's small act of kindness, the coat, the words, had planted a seed. But Sarah had no idea how much more Tom would do, or how his quiet presence would change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. She didn't know it yet, but Tom was already working behind the scenes, talking to local businesses, rallying friends, and pulling strings to help her rebuild. The shelter days blurred together, but Tom's visits became a bright spot. He'd bring Lily little gifts: a crayon set, a storybook, and Sarah noticed her daughter's smiles returning. One day, Tom handed Sarah a card with a phone number. "This is a friend who runs a housing program," he said. "They help people like you get back on their feet. Call them." Sarah stared at the card, her throat tight. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Tom shrugged, his eyes crinkling. "Because someone helped me once. Now it's my turn." That moment, simple as it was, felt like a crack in the darkness. Sarah didn't know if the number would lead anywhere, but for the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. The chapter of her fall was ending, and something new was about to begin. Sarah clutched the card Tom had given her, her fingers tracing the numbers as if they might disappear. It had been a week since their conversation, and she'd hesitated to call, afraid of another dead end. But Lily's hopeful eyes, and Tom's quiet encouragement, pushed her to dial the number. The voice on the other end belonged to Maria, a caseworker with a local housing program. Her tone was warm but direct, and she asked Sarah to come in for a meeting. Sarah felt a mix of nerves and hope as she and Lily took a bus across town, the card tucked safely in her pocket. The office was small but welcoming, with photos of families on the walls, of families who'd found homes, Maria explained. She reviewed Sarah's situation, her income, her needs, and then said something Sarah hadn't dared hope for. "We have a program that can help you get into an apartment. It's subsidized, and will cover the deposit." Sarah's heart raced. It sounded too good to be true, but Maria's calm confidence reassured her. The program was funded by a local charity, one Tom had quietly connected her to. Sarah didn't know it yet, but Tom had spent days calling in favors, vouching for her, and ensuring her application moved to the top of the pile. The process wasn't instant. There were forms, interviews, and waiting, but within a month, Sarah held the keys to a small one-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood. It was plain, with beige walls and a slightly creaky floor, but to Sarah, it was a palace. Lily ran through the empty rooms, giggling, her voice echoing. For the first time since the fire, Sarah cried tears of relief, not pain. She hugged Lily tightly, whispering, "We're home, baby." But the story didn't end there. Tom's kindness rippled further. He'd rallied his network of friends, former students, local shop owners to help furnish the apartment. One day, Sarah came home to find a delivery truck outside. Neighbors she'd never met carried in a couch, a table, a bed for Lily, even a small TV. There were pots and pans, curtains, and a new stuffed bear for Lily, almost identical to the one she'd lost. Sarah was overwhelmed, her eyes brimming as she thanked everyone. She learned later that Tom had organized it all, quietly, without seeking credit. He'd even started a small fundraiser, collecting enough to cover Sarah's utilities for 6 months. When she tried to thank him, he waved it off. "You're the one doing the hard work," he said. "I'm just giving you a step." Sarah started to see herself differently. The apartment gave her stability, but Tom's belief in her gave her courage. She enrolled in a community college program for medical billing, something she'd always wanted to try but never had the means. It wasn't easy balancing work, classes, and raising Lilia, but Sarah felt a fire inside her she hadn't known was there. Lily, too, was thriving. The new school was kind, and she made friends quickly, her laughter filling the apartment. Sarah would watch her daughter sleep, the new bear tucked under her arm, and feel a gratitude so deep it hurt. But life wasn't perfect. There were still bills, long shifts, and moments of doubt. One evening, exhausted after a late class, Sarah sat at her new table, staring at a textbook. The words blurred, and old fears crept in. What if she couldn't keep this up? What if she failed again? That's when Tom stopped by, unannounced, with a pizza for Lily and a coffee for Sarah. He didn't say much, just sat with her, listening as she poured out her worries. "You're not failing," he said firmly. "You're fighting." "That's enough." He told her about his own struggles after his wife's death, how he'd felt lost but kept going for his son. "One step at a time," he said. "That's how you build a life." Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. Tom's words became her mantra. Months passed, and Sarah's life transformed. She graduated from her program, landing a job as a medical biller with better pay and hours. She could afford small treats for Lilia, a trip to the zoo, a new dress, and the apartment began to feel like a home, filled with their laughter and memories. Sarah started volunteering at the shelter, inspired by Tom, helping others the way she'd been helped. She'd see Tom there sometimes, still handing out coats or fixing something broken, always with that quiet smile. One day, she asked him why he did it and why he spent so much time helping strangers. Tom paused, his eyes distant. "When my wife died, a neighbor brought us meals for weeks. Never asked for anything. That kept us going. I promised myself I'd pay it forward." Sarah realized then that Tom's kindness wasn't just about her, it was a chain, linking one act to another, stretching across lives. She decided to be part of that chain. By the time a year had passed since the fire, Sarah barely recognized her life. She had a home, a career, and a daughter who smiled more than ever. She'd framed a photo of her and Lily in their new apartment, a reminder of how far they'd come. She invited Tom over for dinner one evening, a simple meal of spaghetti and store-bought cake, but to Sarah, it was a milestone. As they ate, Lily chattered about school, and Tom listened with the same warmth he always showed. After dinner, Sarah handed him a card, a thank you note she'd spent hours writing. "You changed my life," she said, her voice thick. Tom read the card, his eyes misty, and hugged her. "You changed it yourself," he said. "I just gave you a push." Sarah knew he was right, but she also knew that without his kindness, she might still be lost. The story of Sarah and Tom wasn't just about a coat or an apartment, it was about the power of one person to make a difference, to pull someone back from the edge. It was a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there's hope, waiting in the kindness of a stranger.